going to have the economic cluster from the Department of Economics.
Thank you very much. I'm sure you are not counting because I have a comment to make, especially when I look at the clusters. The last one is mindset. And mindsets are built on systems. So I told my colleague I will say it. One of the challenges we are facing is that when we set the systems and we don't go by the systems, it means that we throw everything away. When you travel outside, they have been able to transform because they go by the systems. Time is important. When they are supposed to start at 10, they start at 10. Raymond will tell you out there when you are going to school and it is snowing, you will go to school, you go for class, they will not cancel it. But in Ghana, when it rains, no classes. So I had a problem when Bawule changed it. And I said, you are an ethics person, but you are changing the system. Because the moment you can lobby and then change the program, it becomes very difficult to implement policies in a way that we want. So I thought I should make that comment before I start. So I'm here with my colleague who may also come in. Uh, when I look at the GTP, my comment is that the economy is supposed to sit on the other clusters because if there's five clusters don't work, there's no way you can have any transformation. Governance is important, infrastructure is important, ethics important, social is important. So the economic transformation will be possible if the five other clusters are well laid out and well implemented. Now, I look at it and I ask myself, if you are looking at transformation and you are basing it on agriculture, manufacturing, and tourism, then it appears to me that you might have read a couple of papers that we have written. The one that I wrote with NSIT that says that for structural, and it is titled Ghana's Growth Performance or Strong Growth Performance by Job Creation Challenges. The main issue that we raised was that you can only transform, look at agriculture, manufacturing, and tourism. So it resonates well into what we have been advocating for all this while. Then you also are on track when you spoke about macro stability growth before you can develop. I think what you didn't also look at is there is also a feedback. There's also a feedback. If I had a diagram, maybe I would have shown. So you have macro stability that will move into the real sector for growth to come up. And then the social services also have their share. And when the social services have their share and they are being developed very well, feeds into growth again, feeds into macro stability. So it is like this. It goes this way. So we have to not see it as one line, but it goes back because if you look at social services where we are looking at productivity, labor productivity, activity will then move into the real sector, propel growth. And if you have growth, then macro stability is also assured. If macro stability is assured, it will give you growth and growth social. So it goes around it. So that is also something that I thought I should point out. But my key thing, I don't want to make it like I'm asking questions. To be a form of comment, then you can. So in all these, we need to look at the fiscal and also the monetary. And then you talk about the taxes expenditure, you talk about inflation, exchange rate, and so on. One major point on taxation. I think one thing that I saw is that you are going to uh, also to expand the tax net, and I saw that to cover the informal sector. I think we need to be very careful when we talk about that because since 1970s or whatever, when I read economics and understood economics, we've been trying to expand the tax net, but we have not been able to do it because we've not been able to identify what we are talking about. Now, Statistical Service has given us data. Informal sector accounts for 27% of GDP. You can look at it. every quarter is there 27% on average to GDP. So if you are saying I'm going to expand the tax net, so it means that the formal sector, which is 73% the tax. So it is not that the formal sector is small, the formal sector is the bigger chunk, about 3 quarters of it, and they are paying the tax. We forget that in Ghana, there are two types of taxes all over the world: direct, indirect tax. Everybody, whether you are in the informal sector, you are a student, you don't work, so long as you buy goods and services, we paid indirect tax. And indirect tax account for 60% of total taxes. So that one, the informal sector and everybody is paying. So I'm sure you are referring to the direct tax, PAY, the profit tax from informal sector. The informal sector is very heterogeneous. So you may want to expand it, but you will not get what you want because you haven't identified them, not to whether they even make the money, and therefore you tax them. I'll give you an example. You have an artisan, let's say a mason, who uh, charges 150 cedis a day. 150 cedis a day, he doesn't work throughout the month. He may have 150 cedis a day, but throughout the month, he may be working for only 5 or 6 days. So 150 times 6 is 900. So if you assume that, oh, he's taking 150 and so he's taking more money, so you have to go and tax, you go there and there's nothing. So we need to look at it in detail, be able to know whether what we are talking about is it. The second one, exchange rate. I think I just want to bring your mind to the fact that when you look at the balance of payment, you see that the exchange rate is now misbehaving so much because of the capital account. And Ghana, over the years, have been borrowing. And when we borrow and then we get the foreign exchange, we think we have stabilized. When we are supposed to pay back, then we have a problem. Now, what are we going to do now that we've opened up the economy and as a small open economy? When we have foreigners coming in to invest in our domestic bond, and when they are taking their money back, then the economy begins to shake. What measures do you have there to be able to identify to solve? Because that is the major challenge when it comes to the exchange rate. Then expenditure. I'm happy you've mentioned procurement. You didn't touch on wage bill. The wage bill accounts for more than 50% of total expenditure. Even though I have in mind what can be done, but I will put it to you: compensation. Workers are saying they are not paid well. The government is saying that the compensation bill is too much. So, how are you going to bridge that dichotomy? Because it is very, very important. I have my colleague here, Richard, uh, Dr. Richard AUC, senior lecturer at the department, who also add one or two to what I've said.
Thank you. Actually, my question and my concern has actually been raised by Paul because I was concerned. And when you were explaining to Prof. Justice, you indicated some point that I wanted to ask in terms of the Sekano Wahin. Right. So we have all these fancy programs, but why we get the money? But you try to explain through the BOT and other things. So I'll be just be short and say that if we get the second part and the third part to be able to get the programs, we can have specific questions to ask. But my main concern here is about the exchange rate. Most of the economic macro issues that we are facing is exchange rate. But when you look at how Prof was trying to explain, the issue is about we not able to generate enough reserves. How are you going to ensure that we have that reserves with your programs so that when it is time for us to pay the debt, we'll have that excess reserve that will not have issue on our exchange? That's what I'll ask. I'll answer.
Okay. So, thank you. In conclusion, I would say for the economy, we have a lot to discuss. We wouldn't mind if we have one on one and dig very deep into it. I'll conclude by saying ethics, very important. Mindset, very important. I learned something when I went out there. Mindset starts from leadership. The moment the leader has a very good mindset, transcends downwards. We are not able to have very good mindset because of the problem of leadership. Because if the police arrest somebody and he says, "My father is the chief, my father is the president son," it means that nothing will be done. So it starts from leadership, and that is what I learned. I don't know your comment on that. Thank you.
Comes back to reinforce the macro. You see, for example, if you are able to create jobs, people earn income. When they earn income, it increases their purchasing power. When people are buying more because they have higher purchasing power, then people who are producing will respond to it. And when they respond to it, it means that they will increase their production, increase employment, and then that feeds into uh, uh, direct taxes because now they are going to pay more taxes. So it is a cycle. The important thing is that you have to expand the productive sectors of the economy. That is fundamental. You cannot expand the productive sectors of the economy, you cannot create jobs. If you don't create jobs, there will be no revenue. And if there's no revenue, people will not spend. If people don't spend, then it limits the appetite of those who are producing produce. So the whole thing will go into what I call an economic cul-de-sac. And this is where we found ourselves in. So I agree with you. We have to make sure that we let people understand that it's a cycle. Then you move on to fiscal. I think the point that you've raised is very important, but when we do the one-on-one, we'll deep dive into it. Because, Prof, that's like what I talked about when I said we have no choice but to understand as a country that government cannot finance infrastructure. You have no choice. There's no evidence in any country, anywhere in the world, that they have robust infrastructure that is financed by government. The same thing with the informal sector. There's no evidence of any country that has developed in a qualitative way based on the informal sector. So again, we have to try and come to terms with this. But the only way we can do this is to formalize the informal sector. We have to transition them. It's not going to happen by chance. You know why, in spite of the fact that we're in IMF 17 time, you go into the economy, people travel from outside. They say, you say you are in trouble? Look at the number of cars on the road, the construction projects that are going on. When you look at Ghanaians, you look at people who are suffering. No. You see, so it is an artificial economy. And it is an artificial economy because that so-called informal sector we are talking about is not the, the, the small company. It's informal. The whole economy is informal for the big companies because people are spending money. We don't know where the money is coming from. And so the central bank, the bank, the commercial banks, the Ministry of Finance, they don't know what is happening in this economy. I can tell you. Because the people who are controlling this economy, you have not even identified them. There's so much money floating around, you know. Oh, that's where it starts from. So that's where this issue about informality, we have to interrogate it further. Because it is true that if you think that it is the small micro enterprise that you are going to tax, you may go there and it is not, but that's not exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the whole structure of the economy. We have to find out what kind of economy is this. We are in trouble, but it's not showing. But that is why it's the most dangerous state that you can find, because we haven't understood what is happening in the economy. But just to close on that, every country must have the capacity to generate revenue, finances. If you don't finance your expenditure, you run into a deficit. If you run into a deficit, you have to borrow to close the deficit. That's what I think. We are caught in a debt not trap, DEBT. We are caught in the debt trap because we are spending more than we earn, and it is perpetual. And so we are always borrowing. The unfortunate thing is that when we borrow, what we do use the money for? We are borrowing to pay salaries. We are borrowing for consumption, buying milk and things that you can actually, and we are borrowing also to finance certain things which don't generate an income. If you are borrowing to construct a road, the payback period is such that you cannot pay your loans. So our understanding of revenue optimization and then expenditure control really has to be re-engineered. But I think the concluding point on that is that we should not make a mistake. If you have a high tax regime, people will not pay. The level of compliance with a high tax regime is statistics are clear. But if you reduce taxes, more investments will come. It's deductive reasoning. If you increase taxes, nobody will invest. They will run away to low tax regimes. If you reduce taxes, it will attract investment, particularly if you have a stable democracy to attract investment. If it attracts investment, you are growing your tax base, even if you don't touch the informal sector. So it's probably something we have to think through it when we deep dive. And you also made a point about exchange rate. And I'm happy you took it from the angle of people who are buying bonds, and securities. Basically, that's more of portfolio investment. That's portfolio investment where people are bringing money to buy government securities. Obviously, if you have a dollar denominated security and somebody invests in that, why? You have to, when the time comes for maturity, the bond, you have to pay back. So that one I think is standard. But the deficiency in our system is our bond market is not properly structured. And government is borrowing forward, as I'm saying. All these bonds that we are issuing, even the Euro bond, the domestic bonds, how are you borrowing? You are borrowing to finance consumption. So I hope there's something wrong with the structure. But so we have no choice. When people invest in dollar denominated bonds, they have to be able to transfer their money. But I'm happy that your colleague brought in this issue because you raised that issue in respect of how we stabilize our currency. At this point about the supply of foreign exchange on the basis of which you can have reserves. Because if there's no inflow of foreign exchange, you cannot build your reserves. So the only way you can have a consistent, substantial flow of foreign exchange is to export. That one, it goes without saying. Have you heard any head of state in Ghana talk about exports or even in other African countries? But we don't understand. It's all about exports. If for 100 years your economy is depending on only one commodity for exports, how can you survive? Cocoa, it doesn't give you more than 2 billion a year. Gold, the amount of gold we export, if you look at the production figures, look at the income we get from, as a net, it really doesn't give us anything. But the real deal is us to export. And I started talking about exports during the first time. Oil palm alone, if we don't do anything at all, and we convert all our lands maturity into oil palm, we'll earn not less than 20 billion every year. Because Malaysia does that. Only from oil palm. They earn 20 billion because they don't drink alcohol. If they were converting it into palm and then champagne, oh, by now they'll top 30 billion. So exports is very important. Once you increase exports, you get more revenue. More revenue that reduce, and you have to reduce your imports. If you export more, and you continue to import, then it's in and out. So it's, you know, now the World Bank, the IMF, all these development agencies, they don't want to talk about import substitution. When we were learning economics, they don't know, you cannot talk about import substitution because of the theory of comparative advantage and all this. It doesn't work anymore. The theory of comparative advantage. People talk about competitive advantage. But if you are going to base everything on comparative advantage, somebody has a comparative advantage over you, so you will not produce everything. How are you going to survive? Anyway, that's for our next round of discussions. And I think that the ethics, I could not um, but agree with you. I think the mindset absolutely critical if we want to have economic independence. Because all this corruption is based on financial insecurity, and it is you are spending, you don't have money, you are doing big things, eh? So that's your value. That's our value. Obviously, the economy will not work. So I thought it's a good point that, yeah. But that's why we have 6 clusters. They are all reef because they are not in any order priority. You need all the 6 clusters. So the problem I have with Ghanaians is that they say, "Oh, and then this thing is too much." You are talking about this. Which one do you want us to remove? You want us to, because you are talking about economy, we should not talk about mindset, or because you are talking about mindset, we should not talk about infrastructure development, or because you are talking mindset, we should not talk about social services. So this is the most comprehensive economic framework, that, in my view, will move this country forward. So the next round. But thank you, Prof, for economic